Hi, friends. Today I'm going to be spotlighting a documentary film. The film I'm spotlighting is Street Smart Lessons from a TV Icon, directed by Ernie Bustamante. So, Street Smart is a feature documentary film about Sonia Manzano, who many of you probably know as Maria from the original Sesame Street series. A lot of us grew up watching Sesame Street. And Maria was one of the first Latinas that was on television at the time. So she's become an icon, not just for Latinos worldwide, but for other folks who've grown up with the series Sesame Street. So the film follows Sonia's really remarkable story through her youth to her adulthood years and becoming sort of this really world-renowned first Latina on American television. So Ernie Bustamante and his crew have created a film that takes us through 44 years of her life in terms of being on Sesame Street, her current life as an activist, an educator, a writer, an Emmy winning writer as well. And there's so much of Sonia that comes through this documentary that is so inspiring, but there's also moments of humor and heart as well. And I hope that you get to see it at a city near you. Right now, Street Smart Lessons from a TV Icon is making its way through the film festival circuit. So stay tuned for updates through the film's website, streetsmartfilm.com, I believe it is, but correct me if I'm wrong. It'll be in the description of this video. But now I will leave you with my conversation with director Ernie Bustamante, where we talk about Sonia Manzano and Street Smart Lessons from a TV Icon. Hi, friends. So we're back in the virtual room. I am joined, you're in Miami today, Ernie.
I am. I'm
I
actually in Miami for the Miami Film Festival where Street Smart is screening, but also our film subject, Sonia Manzano, is receiving the festival's Impact Award before the screening. So that's a really exciting event that we'll have in addition to the screening, which I'm real excited about.
We're really excited. I'm also really excited. I'm here in Toronto, as you know. We're going to be speaking about Street Smart, Lessons from a TV Icon, as you mentioned. And Ernie Bustamante, tell us a little bit about yourself to kind of get folks kind of, getting to know you a little bit. I know you come from the writer's room, but this is your first feature doc.
It is. It is. That really is my background in training. When I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in entertainment, I was really laser focused on TV writing,
Mhm.
comedy writing. And so, I started out working as a writer assistant in writers' rooms, working on pilots. I mean, this is back in the early 2000s when, the broadcast networks were producing 10 pilots on the comedy side and on the drama side. And so you were able to get kind of hands-on experience watching a pilot get made and produced and learning from that in the writer's room, which I benefited from. Now it's very rare that networks and studios are producing any pilots. And so that really was my training ground in terms of learning my craft in terms of story. And so when I met Sonia, it was in 2016, almost 10 years ago. And I guess it was 10 years ago, 2016. Holy cow, that really blows by. But it was to adapt her memoir, Becoming Maria, as a scripted sitcom. So I had been working as a TV writer, staffing on shows, pitching and selling my own shows. And so that's what led to me reaching out to Sonia.
Mhm. Thank you for saying that because I actually was going to ask you what was that first encounter and how were you introduced? So that makes sense. So let's segue, that's how you met about potential series, but now you're sharing her life with us. I mean, many of us grew up with Sonia as Maria from Sesame Street. I watched it dubbed in Guatemala, then I moved here and I watched the later versions, and I think you grew up with it too. So, what's it like to be able to create with her or like I guess tell her story alongside with her?
It really was such a privilege and an honor to be working alongside her, particularly in the early stages, because we were collaborating. I
Mhm.
saw, when I read her memoir, Becoming Maria, it really focuses on her young adult years. So it starts, her being born and growing up in the South Bronx, and it ends with her getting cast on Sesame Street. So it's all the experience, her going to the High School Performing Arts, her getting a scholarship to Carnegie Mellon, her being cast in the original production of Godspell, none of which many people know. Obviously, it's in the documentary, but we collaborated over 4 years, every year working with a studio, a different network, a different producer, and we couldn't get it across the finish line to get a green light as a TV sitcom. And finally, 2020 happened. We have a pandemic, we have a writer strike, an actor strike. I kind of saw the writing on the wall where it's like I pivoted and I decided, look, if it can't be told in a scripted sitcom, even better story, her real story, through a documentary. And then I slowly began putting the pieces together in 2022 when I did her first sit down interview. So the documentary took about 3 years to fully produce.
Wow, that's pretty good for documentaries, to be honest. So
That's
congrats.
what I'm told. That's what I'm told. And you know what? I really should be counting all the development because all of that informed so much of the story, because there would be times when, we were developing the scripted sitcom where we would be on a call with a network executive and Sonia would be talking about some story behind the scenes on
Wow.
Sesame Street in the studio, working with John Stone, working with the producers. And, none of this is going to go into the scripted sitcom, but, where does that story go? And, I was able to really mine a lot of stories. And so because we had developed her story for so long, or I had developed it for so long, once I decided, okay, I want to produce her documentary, I really kind of knew what moments stood out that were the most cinematic to put on camera.
That's amazing. And what was her response to you proposing the shift to documentary?
I think Sonia and I collaborated really early on and, we had a great working relationship. And I think it was kind of like, okay, I guess if you say so, she was I was lucky in that she trusted me. And, again, we had so much success with getting producers, getting studios, but we just couldn't get it far enough. So I think hopefully that in her head she knew that I'd be able to take it all the way, because I guess from her perspective, if someone wanted to do a documentary on me, well, first I hope they finish it. And so I think I had earned her confidence that if she would allow me to tell her full story through a feature-length documentary, that I would finish it. And I really was committed to that.
Yeah, I think it comes on screen quite genuinely too, in terms of she being very open from the get-go. At least that's as a viewer, that's how I felt about getting to know her. I felt like I was getting almost a personal, obviously it's personal because she's saying a lot, sharing a lot of her stuff, but even the other elements of the film feel really personal, but we'll hold on to those in a minute. But I wanted to ask what it was like to speak with her. I know in a lot of interviews we talk about how you've talked about how she's very true to herself through the years. She's very unapologetically who she is, and I think that's sort of what made us love her through the television as kids, and as we got older, we saw her grow up with us. So what was that essence that you were trying to capture and the message that you want to share with us? Because I think that is so relevant to the state of the world as it is.
One of the things, well, two things that really stand out to Sonia and her being such a dynamic person and character is that, first of all, she's really funny.
Hmm.
And, obviously on Sesame Street, her scenes with Oscar the Grouch, they're this great comedic duo. But
Right.
not many people may know that Sonia Manzano, people know that Maria was funny, right? But they don't know that Sonia Manzano has just this like wit and humor even in her writing is really sharp and funny. And so that I hope comes across as something I definitely learned, but also how laser focused Sonia was in her career and through her goals, which inspired myself. I saw a lot of myself in Sonia. I remember growing up in high school, being literally the valedictorian, ranked number one in my class, and my high school counselor not thinking that I could apply, not, that I should apply or could get into Stanford, which was my number one school. And
Right.
so I kind of had to go around her back, which is exactly what Sonia did in at the Performing Arts High School when she wanted letters of recommendation to college. So knowing that, obviously my life doesn't mirror hers, but there were, moments that I really related to her as, a young, ambitious Latino, trying to maneuver the world of entertainment, of performing arts. And I really think that those watching, whether you're Latino or not, I think will really draw inspiration from how Sonia really never gave up on any of her goals. And when there was, obstacles in front of that herself, she kind of faced them head on. I mean, that's what you want in a protagonist for a film.
Right.
You have conflict and the protagonist just blows through that conflict. They meet it, they face it, and she uses everything in her life, the bad moments, the good moments, to kind of who she is. And in the film, they talk about how that built the character of Maria and what it was so real. So a lot of lessons that I learned in making the film, working with her and through her life, and I really hope the audience will take away those some of those lessons as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, well, as you know, I'm also Latina, but I also think just seeing that some of the struggles that she's gone through, sometimes they're still around,
Yeah.
underwater, and but it's still that motivation to keep going. And I think the message of authenticity and kind of showing everything that makes us who we are is still very relevant, which I think she was doing. She was kind of a pioneer in a sense because she also brought that to the television show in terms of Sesame Street and being able to be in the writer's room there too, to give
Yeah.
us a little bit more of that family dynamic that a lot of us were not seeing at the time. I think it's really relevant today still,
Yeah.
um, because we don't see a lot of those diverse groups as often as we wish we could. So I agree with you. I think there's a lot that we can draw from her as a person, but also the work that she's done, forging ahead for us.
Yeah.
When we think about what she's done, what I really loved in the film is how she opens this. You tell us how she, as a child, was also very much about watching television as a refuge. And a lot of us, I think, did that. Probably because of those decades where we grew up, maybe late 80s, 1990s. But then she kind of becomes this TV icon. And I kind of wanted to know if there were any parallels in you that, kind of led you to exploring this career in the arts that you have.
When I saw Sonia Manzano as Maria and Emilio Delgado as Luis on Sesame Street, I really did see my parents because my mom is Mexican American and my dad is Puerto Rican.
Mhm.
And so to see this couple that spoke English and Spanish, were funny, but they weren't the joke.
Mhm.
They had a sense of humor. They were real, fully fleshed out characters. It was very, from that moment on, I really didn't see Latinos in TV, in comedy portrayed in those ways. In the United States, many times on broadcast television, on mainstream television, in comedy, Latinos have an accent. They are the maid, they are the cholo, they're the gangster, they are caricatures. And you didn't see that with Maria or Luis. And
Mhm.
so to me, as a writer who has been, pitching shows to networks with characters like Maria, like my family, I really thought that, it was really inspirational to be able to tell this story because she was funny, but not because she was Latina. It was because she was funny because she was smart and she was witty and she was strong. And, if more people saw Latinos in this manner, I think we would have a very different perception of Latinos in the United States and their contributions to society because humor you can teach so much through humor, and that's what Sonia Manzano has done.
Definitely. And I think she continues to do so with her other series as well.
Yeah.
I'll make sure people know that. You're gonna have to see the film because, we're gonna talk about so much cool stuff. But or she can do a master class on this herself. So there's a bit of a recurring idea here in the film too about television being both um, literally a window to the dimensions that Latinos are and all people of different cultures, but also as refuge and opportunities for education. So I wanted to ask you in making the film how you see the power of, television or media in terms of the younger viewers, but also all generations, really.
Yeah, I mean, television is such a powerful medium, such a powerful tool. And, I absolutely was drawn towards television. I know during the pandemic, going back to a lot of comedies
Hmm.
for refuge because, we're stuck at home. This is just like chaos all around us. And that really was something that I gravitated towards. And I remember when I decided to embark on making this documentary, I thought that people who would be most interested would be people like myself, you know, from age 35 up who saw Sonia in the 80s. And I thought, well, what if Sonia could be on television or have a show or a documentary where she could tell the viewer adult lessons, almost like we were watching Sesame Street or a children's show with adult lessons for an adult audience. And so I wanted to kind of play with not just telling her story in an arc, which I do because it's a feature film, but through lessons so that it would feel like nostalgic, like we were watching her again on the television, but now as adults with totally different lessons.
For sure. So let's talk about the blend that you use in the film because it's a documentary. It's about Sonia Manzano, but you also use elements of animation and other scripted sequences and a little bit. It kind of reminds, like you said, it's very much about mimicking a bit of the television vibe, if you
Yeah.
will. Kind of wanted to ask,
Variety show. Yeah.
how did you decide this would be complementary?
You know, I think, when I decided to use reenactments, it really was drawing from my previous development. I had always seen, for example, when she gets into college, when a first generation student gets into college, it's such an important and memorable thing for a young student. I'm also a professor and I teach undergrad. So I know the impact that that has on a young student and how it just is life changing. So I knew I wanted to dramatize that.
Yes.
Her young life as a child, there's not a lot of pictures. There's not a lot of photos that she had, in her own personal archive.
Right.
And there's quite frankly not a lot of behind the scenes of Sesame Street that's available. And so knowing I wanted to tell the stories of her childhood and knowing that I wanted to tell the stories of her behind the scenes at Sesame Street, I knew I would have to create them. And so I decided to use animation and recreation. And I just really thought I got so lucky in all of my cast
Mhm.
that just did such an amazing job, beautiful work that it just the actress who plays Sonia in the film, Grisel Escoto, I mean, she has to do comedy, she has to do drama, she has to do lessons. I mean, she really,
Mhm.
uh, she's so great, and I'm so thankful for all the cast and the animator, Jeffrey Aviles. I met him on Instagram. I found him on Instagram. And
Amazing.
I really liked his work and I reached out. And so, what was really great about kind of assembling all of these people in the cast and the crew is that Sonia also meant something to them.
Mhm.
So you have, I remember when I was talking to Grisel, the actress, she said, I did Godspell too. I went to a performing arts high school, so, very rarely do Latinos get to portray these characters that, are just kind of like Sonia says in the film, ordinary people, normal people, not caricatures, real people.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. I was also curious how easy it was to find your other collaborators, the people you interview about Sonia, the other Sonia, the Honorable Sonia Sotomayor, and you know, um, other folks that have worked with her. Like, I think you got some really key interviews to give us yet this other dimension of who she is.
Yeah, I got really lucky in that regard. And so, just the fact that I was able to interview Justice Sonia Sotomayor, Stephen Schwartz is in the film, cast members from Sesame Street, her colleagues at the Bronx Children's Museum. And, much like when I would reach out to the crew about working on this film and people being so enthusiastic and wanting to help, that was when I would reach out to people to interview, that was the response I got. Whatever I can do, I'm happy to have. And it really speaks to Sonia and how collaborative she was. And I guess maybe it goes without saying, you can't have a 45 plus career in entertainment without, making a lot of friends along the way. But just to see how impactful all of her working relationships have been, whether she's a mentor or a colleague or a collaborator, all
Mm.
those people were so excited and so generous with their time. And I'm really grateful for that because it speaks to not just the film, but really Sonia's character that all these people rolled out to agree to be interviewed for the film.
Yes, I think that's always nice to see once we see the finished film, I think it's always nice to see who really feels excited to talk about the person or share an anecdote, for example. It's I know with documentaries there's a lot of material and you have to narrow it down to a final version. When did it click for you emotionally?
Yeah.
This is the one we're going with, and now you're taking it on the road, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of great stories from her childhood that we couldn't include. She really got into the activism on campus, which I, as a political science major and a, political junkie, I really, and there were just so many different avenues in the story. One of the stories that, really, was like how the Latino representation came about in Sesame Street. Latino activists on the West Coast demanded Latino representation, and Sesame Street listened. And so they cast Luis and Maria because of this pressure of activist groups. And so I tracked down the committee, I talked to the committee, and I thought, this really, this is that's a different documentary. And
Sure.
so what really helped me kind of crystallized the film was looking at it really like a feature film. In Act One, young Sonia, is finding refuge in television. In Act Two, she makes it literally into the television and provides refuge as a performer, as a writer, obviously all the conflict that goes into that, getting her bearings. And then in the third act, she's a master of the craft of television. She's a TV creator on her own terms. And I just, if you were to pitch that, I don't think anyone would believe that. It truly is inspirational.
For sure, absolutely. And the film is been taken off. You're taking it to festivals. I want to make sure we leave time to let folks know that you have upcoming screenings in the US. So I think at the start you told us you're at Miami because you're going to the Miami Film Festival, and then you're off to San Francisco. Is that right?
Yes, yes. You can follow us along on our website, streetsmartfilm.com. And so we post all of our screenings. And so this weekend, we are at the Miami Film Festival. The following weekend, on the 18th, we will be at the Phoenix Film Festival, followed by San Luis Obispo and San Francisco. And so, and then in May, we're going to be back in Austin, Texas, but that date hasn't landed yet. So, yeah.
Excellent. And I I've been keeping track because I am following the socials too. So I'll be sure people know where the links are in the descriptions.
Thank you.
Um, I'm mindful of time, but I also just kind of want to ask if you want to leave us with maybe one or two anecdotes of the experience so far in terms of the reception it's received across different parts. Because I know it's been here in Toronto, Canada, but
Yeah, Toronto was amazing. It was snowing, and I'm from Arizona. I'm from LA, and I'm like, oh, no one's gonna come. It's snowing. Toronto people are not afraid of the snow. I could tell you that. And that was a great screening because it was our international premiere. We had never, it was January 10th, I believe. We were at the Hot Doc Cinema,
yeah.
which was a great experience, a great audience. And, one of the things I learned through, traveling with the film, we were just at South by Southwest EDU where we screened for educators. And that was a great crowd. Last weekend we were at Symphony Space back in New York for the Symphony Space members. And in New York, we screened a Doc NYC for a general screening, but also they programmed us a special screening for high school kids. So they bust in high school kids during the school hours, and I was really nervous for that. I was like, "Oh my goodness, these high school kids are gonna rip us to shreds." And they were into it because they related to its young adult journey, a young girl who makes it to the high school performing arts and goes to college. So there was that perspective. And so I think that's one of the things that I've learned along the festival journey was how wide the audience was for this film. I knew that it wasn't just a Latino story. I knew that because, while following Sonia for the last 2.5 years, everyone of all backgrounds would come up to Sonia, many oftentimes emotional and tears. So I knew she had had that impact across ethnicity. But the age range of film was something that surprised me, and I was really pleasantly surprised by that.
I'm so glad to hear that because again, it's mirroring the story you're telling us about finding refuge and education in TV and film, in the arts in general. And I think you've done that so well here. So I kind of want to thank you for speaking about it with me today.
Yeah, I remember when I was at Bentonville where we premiered the film, there was a young girl. She was probably like 22 years old, college age. And I asked her, I go, can I ask you a question? I go, you didn't grow up watching Maria, but you came and watched the film anyway. I'm just curious what drew you to. And she said, I love Sesame Street and I wanted to learn more about it. So, there's so many angles
Yeah.
and waves into the story. The people who love Broadway. I mean, so many people. Sonia was in off-Broadway production of Godspell. That's in the film, and so it's not just a story about Maria on Sesame Street. It's about Sonia Manzano's full life, which is, she's receiving an impact award this weekend, and she's still making an impact, which is really amazing.
Not stopping, and I don't want her
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think she's also, you know, again, continuing to inspire us to keep pushing. And also, I'm just so glad that I can add a little bit to covering this story. And please give her my best.
Thank you so much, Heidi.
Yeah, thank you for your time, Ernie.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.